After 13 years of civil war in Syria, more than half a century of brutal authoritarian rule by Bashar Assad and his father before him, rebel forces have forced Assad to resign his office and flee the country. We're not sure where he is, but there's word that he's in Moscow. At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks.
Jubilant Syrians across the UK, diaspora and displaced.
And we should start a new future for Syria, democratic Syria.
I'm looking for the first flight to Syria to go back.
Amina Kholani is a survivor of Bashar al-Assad's torture.
In my dream, I cannot imagine we will arrive to this moment. Do you know what happened now? The dictator is gone. Sorry, this is the freedom for Syria. We pay a huge price for that.
This meeting is being recorded.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Abdul-Rahman. I'm sure you have heard the news all over social media. Syria is free, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Turn the TV on, turn the internet on, have a look. It's all over the news.
Yep, you can't escape it. It stops us from sleeping because even if you're following the main flagship news broadcasts on terrestrial TV or in the UK, and your phone's blowing up from another time zone where other people are sending you stuff while they're, all bright and awake. And it's incessant and it's riveting and nerve-wracking in parts as well.
SubhanAllah, I mean, for me, it's like a Groundhog Day moment because I remember in 2011 when the Arab world effectively was just lit on fire. And there was this amazing kind of like the zeitgeist of the time. Liberation, freedom, we've had enough.
Tonight, we thank everybody helping us and sharing us our celebration of the death of Saddam.
And then I remember, as each of the figures fell one by one. Saddam, Gaddafi, Mubarak. And we saw these nations in Egypt, especially Egypt, the epicenter of it all, because we found a new government. Ahwal Muslimin came to power, Morsi was elected.
Jubilation in Cairo's Tahrir Square after the long-awaited declaration of the winner of Egypt's presidential election. The country's election commission announced that Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood won with nearly 52% of the vote. Morsi won the country's first free election over Ahmed Shafiq. Shafiq was the last prime minister under deposed leader Hosni Mubarak. This is the first time modern Egypt will be headed by an Islamist. Morsi is also the first in modern times not to come from the military. The announcement was the culmination of a tumultuous 16-month transition. It was supposed to bring democratic rule, but was tightly controlled and curtailed by the military rulers who took power from Mubarak. The outcome will not put an end to the main power struggle in the country, now between Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood and the military. Matt,
it was electric. I remember that era so vividly. But this gives me a bit of a deja vu moment. I don't know I'm not sure whether I feel happy, whether I feel apprehensive, but there's something in the air that I just cannot take it at face value. Although I'm very happy, I'm just apprehensive. I don't know what you feel. What's your take on it?
Yeah, this for me is a lot worse, a lot more apprehensive, because any celebration we would have ordinarily has to be put against or juxtaposed against an ongoing genocide. So it's difficult to celebrate that on the one hand, when we know that not only is a genocide ongoing in Palestine, of course, we're speaking about, but it's has direct consequences and beneficiaries of that genocide. So this is the dichotomy that we have to give weep tears of joy on the one hand and tears of sadness on the other. Intermittently, depending on what image is sent to us, or what video clip, or what statistic of names of dead or deceased stuff, is read out. And then on top of that, what really ups the ante even more is there's a Ukraine war going on where NATO, even without all of this, there's this talk of World War III. And it's not just talk, it is ramping up to, beyond the proxies fighting each other. Now they're throwing missiles at each other, very sophisticated. And so all of that's building up. And then these same actors have skin in the game in what's going on in Syria. And even if they didn't have it in Palestine, now they've got it in Palestine because of what's going on in Syria. And then all the way at the other end of the Eurasian continent, you've got China, flexing its power, sitting back, the sleeping giant, which is certainly involved in the Ukraine conflict in terms of supplying not just military tech, but obviously political support to one side, and then they're heavily involved in Africa in the way they weren't during the first not at the level anyway of the first Arab Spring that you mentioned. So all of these separate tentacles of the world all kind of mingling together, and the Muslim Ummah is right smack bang in the heart of it. So it's
listen, I'm a bit more skeptical. I know I've kind of bothered a lot of people over the last couple of hours because I've just been awake, watching and listening to everything possible. And I don't know, as a history buff, quite frankly, Brother Abdul-Rahman, I'm seeing flashbacks. I'm thinking Iran-Contra. I'm thinking Operation Timber Sycamore. I'm thinking, how the previous nations celebrated when Gaddafi was assassinated, from the Libyan community in the UK celebrating. How when Mubarak was removed, pretty much half of the Muslim world was celebrating. When Saddam was hung on Eid, the celebrations. And again, each community celebrated in London. So I'm switching my TV and I'm seeing the same news headlines. Syrian community celebrates in London. I'm like, we've been here before. We have been here. And the pattern that has emerged since the Arab Spring actually set itself in motion, there has been a single win. I don't know. Has there been a win? Has there been a positive outcome in the long term for any nation that participated? I don't think so. And I think for me personally, although I wish sincerely that the people of Syria finally find relief, repose, and rest from what was a tremendous ordeal for 50 years, I just find it very difficult, considering the timing, the lineup. We know Israel was literally on the back foot in Lebanon only a couple of days ago. They had to kind of submit to a ceasefire, which is uncharacteristic of Israel. As you know, if they're at an advantage, they press the advantage. They don't relent. So for them to have to take a back seat and kind of move back a bit, and then suddenly we have something erupts in Syria with almost zero. In fact, there's no resistance. The army was there was no resistance. So for me, there is something more to what meets the eye. Quite frankly, I just cannot concede. And also the new leader of the Free Republic of Syria. The history of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. For me, it's just, again, that reminds me of Osama bin Laden after Afghanistan, right? So there are so many correlative causes for concern for me personally when I look back at the historic record. I think it's a bit too early to celebrate, quite frankly. I think it's a bit too early to celebrate, We have to really, there are many questions here that have to be, first of all, answered, because there are, Joe Biden, of all people, is literally is almost celebrating the fact that what used to be effectively Al-Qaeda or an offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Nusra is now controlling Syria. And that is how the tables have turned. How have they turned, in fact? I don't know. But it's just, there is a lot to be clarified. And I think it's just a bit too early, quite frankly. I'm fearful, but I'm also happy and grateful, but I'm still very, very apprehensive. I don't think we're getting the full story.
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic is the wrong term. Obviously, as Muslims, we are optimists by religion. Whoever despairs of the mercy of his Lord, illallah, except those who've gone astray. So we're optimists by religious, creedally, or in terms of our faith teaching. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and realist and understand that people are tested, and in at an individual level, we're tested in accordance with our ability to bear that test. From the mercy of Allah, He only gives us the test so that we can actually pass, in the sense that it will cause us to either choose the right path or the wrong path, the high ground, high ethical, moral ground, which will allow us to purify ourselves at the individual level, or we will fail, and therefore we will turn that test into a proto punishment for the punishment to come if we fail that test. But that's at the individual level. We can't say that on behalf of nations. We can't say a nation is being punished, as some fools would do. Whenever Muslims suffer, this is from Allah, they're being punished. You can't literally say that. They might be as a sign of Allah's love for them and terraforming of them, if you like to use that term, to prepare them for something great, to carry the banner of the caliphate or whatever it might be, or to carry the banner of jihad or whatever it might be. And in that note, I think what's different in this liberation of the people of Syria compared to, let's say, Osama bin Laden and what happened in Afghanistan, actually maybe Afghanistan's too far back, but the more recent stuff you mentioned is just in terms of creedly in the sectarian space. A lot of the people are aware of everything that you've just mentioned, or all of that past. Jolani is aware of how bin Laden was also, an asset trained by the CIA at one stage, and then AQ was formed, and then they fell out of favor. And that's not just something a Muslim experience happened. Manuel Noriega, of course, and these kind of things happen. Saddam Hussein, of course, he was, an American asset at one stage. Yeah. So all of these people are aware of that. Even the Taliban, the first time the Taliban took over Kabul, one of the very iconic scenes or imagery, pardon the pun, was how they dealt with televisions. They'd string them up from TVs, hang them on as if they were rotten fruits of a tree. These box, before we had flat screens, right? These box, and even if we had flat screens, the last place they'd perhaps reached was Afghanistan. And so they were just hanging from a tree, because they considered it for reasons, satanic and un-Islamic. And now they're extremely media savvy, which is why often they harm themselves, because they're very open on television of what they're going to do in terms of education and so on and so forth. But now they can't do it without them, because they know this is how you play the game. So these same people we're talking about, the same, if you like, the sharp end of I don't like the term revolution, or rebellion, but for certain reasons, bad connotations in terms of Marxism revolution or in terms of Khariji rebellion. But be that as may, just in a non
resistance.
Let's say resistance. Yeah, let's say resistance or counter revolutionaries or whatever you want to call them. They are very much aware of all of that backstory, and they surely know they're being played. The question is, how much are they free to do something about it, to stretch their wings? Because everyone plays everyone else, all the different powers, and some of them have really set themselves up for, even though they've did some short-term gains, they've caused a lot of enemies, particularly Turkey now, amongst their erstwhile friends. And if the resistance, I guess that's what we're going to refer now, the new Syrian reality, new Syrian quote-unquote regime, their resistance, rebels, mujahideen, whatever we call them, Islamists, they'll be aware of that, and they'd be looking to exploit that. One example, I know, just freestyling here without, anything chronologically, but just in terms of the airbase and naval base, the Russian airbase and naval base, Latakia airbase and the Tartus naval base, even before they took Hama and Homs and Damascus, Jolani reached out and said that we would like to look forward to, I'm paraphrasing now, some kind of warm relations, friendly relations with the Russians. And from our perspective, I would hope those bases stay, simply because if they go, then the resistance will be beholden to one country, which is Turkey, which is fine right now. And we can mention why it's fine right now, or it's making some very, bodacious moves internationally, and statements internationally, and projections. But that means that should Turkey go, the wind blow for Turkey in a particular direction, then the resistance, or let's call it Syria now, Free Syria, would have Damascus, would have to follow that direction. If it's the Gulf states who are behind this, and they are the main benefactors, financial patrons, whether people are aware of it or not, of the new Syria, then that's where Syria goes. However, if you have competing world powers, such as Russia, and I'd even go as far as say China, if they would invite China to set up a naval base on Syrian territory, then this would break the back or the opportunity for the hegemony of the Zionist West in Syria, which is what they have now. Turkey's a NATO ally, even if it's behaving as a bit of a lone wolf, and that remains to be seen how much of their actions are coordinated, as many people will say this is a Zionist plot from day one, from the beginning, or how much of it is America catching up to and benefiting from, simply because it benefits them, like by being opportunist, in the way Netanyahu was an opportunist. And of course he's going to go for land grabs, just because he went for that land grab that he's going for now. And of course he's saying, as you already said, this is just a temporary buffer to protect Golan. Golan itself was meant to be a temporary buffer. So
They
he's
never
created the
get
buffer to the
exactly.
buffer.
This is
Yeah,
always,
none
it's
of it's
always,
temporary.
like, can I borrow your book for a day? Which turns out to be, can I have it forever, effectively?
Well, they have a saying, don't they, the Israelis? What's mine is mine. What's yours is negotiable.
Wow.
Or they have the other saying, we'll double cross that bridge when we come to it, or we'll burn that bridge after as we cross it. So yeah, like was the Litani River, they don't give, they never give back. Just like governments when they tax you on fuel. I mean, tangential, unrelated, even flippant comment. But when the fuel prices, as we learn in our GCSE classes, of whatever we're studying, the governments never put the price back down. They never say, hey, fuel's going to be cheap for you. They'll make, even if there's a windfall or there's a increase in production, it's the government that takes that extra amount, that the customer doesn't actually see the benefit. So in that kind of sense, whatever land they give, it's never going to go back down unless you fight them for it. Unless you have to give them a concession, such as what Egypt did, for example, giving them the Sinai back, and that's how they got. They give the Egypt the Sinai back in exchange for peace,
Yes.
which you could say is actually capitulation. Capitulation and betrayal of the wider Palestinian cause, you could say, and likewise every country that would come to terms with them. So this is the debate amongst those. I don't want to say the conspiracy theories, in the sense that it's a crazy conspiracy like Area 51 type and flat earthers. And I'm not saying that there's no validity to all of those things, but it's not that level of conspiracy. It's more of a case of, is it that this was orchestrated from the beginning, of at the behest of and according to the plan of Zionists of Israel. If you say Turkey, and then Turkey's part of NATO, and America calls the shots in NATO, and America is in the service of the lobby, the Zionist lobby, then it obviously all roads lead back to Jerusalem in this case. Or is it the case that no one was expecting the regime to collapse, Assad's regime to collapse as fast as it? It caught the Americans off guard, and everyone else, even the Turks, weren't banking on it going to this far. And we can perhaps, if we get into it, go to some indicators of strength and weaknesses to either of these. Or is it that they just played catch up and they're exploiting it because that's what you're going to do? You're going to seek your advantage of every anarchy and chaos, which is an actual classic Al-Qaeda tactic. Al-Qaeda themselves, they have a book on this. I forgot what it's called in Arabic, but it's not like the management of anarchy or something like this. And when a state collapses, that's when these kind of transnational globalist jihadist movements, militant movements, that's where they benefit, they thrive in that chaos, and they can build the form what would later become potentially state or state within a state.
Well, this is how ISIL was formed following the
Yeah.
civil war in Syria that obviously erupted following what triggered it, which was the Arab Spring. So it's a modus operandi. I think the scavenger method, which is
Right.
wait until the carcass falls and then as a pack jump on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then what happens after that is there is a melee, isn't it? Because now each
Yeah.
scavenger is trying to get the biggest piece possible.
Yeah.
You know, these are not disciplined factions, and I like to look at the entire thing holistically. I think there's always a post-mortem to be done when events happen. We're rushing to make decisions based on what is happening today, right now, in Syria.
Yeah.
But we have to do a pathological test analysis and go back to see what killed the carcass, what made it a carcass, what made it a cadaver, how did it die?
Yeah.
It's not a matter of, for me, the way I would give an analogy, it's not Syria wasn't shot, or the Assad regime didn't die in a car crash. It succumbed to a long-term illness, and a small infection on December the 8th finally took it out. So it wasn't a healthy body that was suddenly just killed in a car crash and nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
It was already ailing, it was already dying, and the final nail on the coffin came on December the 8th. But what killed it was a poison that was planted back in 2012, 2011 really. That's when the Assad regime was on the table, on the menu. And American allies were very clear in that they wanted to make sure Assad falls. So this was something that for me is a culmination of a long process. You know, I said earlier today, that the pizza has arrived. You know, that's how I describe it. The pizza has arrived. You ordered it maybe a few years ago. It took time, but it's finally been delivered. And, you know, sometimes you make an order and you forget you made an order for something, and then it arrives one day. Now, the fact that you're surprised it arrived today doesn't mean that you didn't pay for it maybe last week. You ordered it, you specified the item, you paid for it, but the fact that you're surprised it came earlier or later doesn't mean you were not complicit in the first place. So for me, yes, there are elements of surprise in what happened on December the 8th. I can agree. But what I find quite improbable is that the entire process, the entire supply chain was completely off the radar for America, for her allies, effectively. Because if you look at, for example, the key players here, what we're really looking at is a NATO versus the Axis of Resistance scenario here.
Right.
That's what we see. That's what we're looking at, really, because at the moment, you have Lebanon, and you have Syria, and you have Iran, and you have Iraq. The Axis of Resistance, and all four, to varying degrees, are currently locked.
And Yemen, don't forget
and
Yemen.
Yemen, I mean, I could, I shouldn't leave Yemen out of it, but Yemen is a bit distant from the epicenter, and it's quite
geographically speaking,
it's just like it's like this pair, you know, if the substitute player on the team, so the star player. So, but you know, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran are fully engaged, and any one of them being toppled or taken out completely, the team is weak. And so for me, it's not. I don't look at it from an isolated perspective. There is a tapestry here. There is a network, and I think the design of it shows there is clearly an architect behind it. You know, if we focus too much on the personality of Al-Jolani or the faction HTS, we forget the design and the architects behind it. Because for me, it's clearly a team sport. So if the Axis of Resistance as a team has taken a big knock, then the other team certainly has a hand to play in it. But when I say go back to what made the man sick, the analogy I gave earlier, is that the civil war in Syria was effectively funded and financed by first of all, America. That's very clear. The Obama administration financed it. In fact, they had the very, which came out in 2016, a bit later. I'm not sure if you've heard of Operation Sycamore Timber.
But my constant cry was that our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was al-Qaeda in Iraq, which when they were essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory in eastern Syria, worked with al-Nusra, who we declared a terrorist group early on, and we could not convince our colleagues to stop supplying them.
So in 2011, we know the Syrian civil war began. And the objective was to make sure Bashar falls. And I remember, because this was a very epic moment in, I guess, all of our lives, those of us who were alive at the time. We saw the other tyrants fall, or at least flee, or at least get captured. And the last man standing, who seemed to be almost also about to fall, was Bashar. And then civil war breaks out, and then you find that Russia jumps in, Iran jumps in, and automatically what looked like is going to be an eventual win for the rebels or for the resistance became an iron war. So I remember the moments when the Russians and Iran stepped in and the momentum was lost. I was very sad actually, because I thought we almost got this guy, right? So they stepped in. Now America, of course, was not going to just sit back and watch. And so they funded the various factions. At the time in Syria, literally, there are some reports there were hundreds of factions. Much like in Afghanistan, following the Soviets' retreat in 1990. And even during the war, there were various factions, you know. So Syria had the same thing. Now, what America did in the Obama administration was a National Security Council advisor. He sent a message to Obama in 2012, which has been leaked. Now we know what happened. But he said to Obama, Al-Qaeda is our friend or is our ally in Syria. Al-Qaeda is our ally in Syria, right? And so, long story cut short, they come to the negotiating table, and Obama is convinced, he's persuaded to support various factions in Syria in order to topple Assad. And so to do that, a CIA operation known as Operation Timber Sycamore in 2012 was initiated. And as a result of that, there was an entire pipeline system of money and weapons. It reminds me of the Iran-Contra, actually, in the 1980s under Reagan, right? But this was in the Middle East. And so they were effectively receiving funds from Saudi Arabia, from I believe Qatar or Kuwait, the GCC, basically, GCC nations, because they were also lobbying Jordan as well. Jordan was a key petitioner, and also Israel. So they were all in concert to convince America to support and back the militia that would topple Assad, basically. And so Obama, he actually wrote, he signed it off, he greenlit it. And so this operation is not a conspiracy. It's actually, it's a CIA operation, which is now, you can Google it, everything is there. They would invest $1 billion a year to supply hundreds of thousands of weapons in Syria. And that was pipelined through Turkey. So America and her allies would raise the funds, acquire the weapons, push it into Turkey, and from the borders they would get into Syria. And these hundreds of militias would then be not only financed, weaponized, but also trained by CIA operatives. Amongst the main factions that benefited, because obviously they didn't reach everyone, there were some groups that were off limits, but they would nevertheless acquire the weapons through the black market and also the training. So Al-Qaeda was then propped up, was supported, and later on Jabhat al-Nusra was also amongst the beneficiaries of the CIA funding and support. That went on for about 5 years, 2012, 2017. It was Trump who actually decided to stop the operation, 2017. It's only 7 years ago. It's only 7 years ago. By that time, billions of American dollars were invested in this project. And so my thinking, when I look back at the historical, is that America never invests without recouping. It never invests without recuperating its investment. And for me, they've invested, and the investment is irrefutable. It's open. It's an open secret. How have they then recuperated that investment? And for me, the way I look at it, and I could be wrong, you could push back and tell me I'm wrong, but the way I look at it is that they've put so much money into these factions, and the main faction having been Al-Qaeda at the time, Al-Nusra, we know what happened there, but eventually that morphed into HTS. And so for me, when I say the pizza has arrived, this is the pizza I'm talking about. This is the pizza that was ordered in 2012 that has finally arrived. Now, the arrival is a surprise, certainly, but the order was not a surprise. We have the receipts. The receipts are available. We can see the itemized bill for what happened. So I'd take a bit more of a critical, I guess, look at it, a bit more of a precautious look at it, because for me, we have seen this, Brother Abdul-Rahman, after the Afghan war, when the Soviets retreated. In the same way, we are seeing reports that the Russians left Syria like cowards. We had the same scene in 1990 when they left Afghanistan. But when they left Afghanistan, what they left behind them was effectively a scene yes, an open field ready for civil war. So we found, for example, Abdullah Azzam, his Mujahideen Bureau, or the Al-Qaeda, which was at the time under Sheikh Ayman al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden. But you had the other factions at the same time. When I hear all these acronyms, HTS and these different acronyms, it reminds me of all the different acronyms at a time when, just before the Afghan Civil War, you had people such as Ahmed Shah Massoud, right?
Yeah.
Northern Alliance, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Hizb Islami, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, famous Sayyaf, right? And then Taliban came afterwards. So for me, the Taliban, which comes in 1994, the Taliban is the equivalent of HTS. Because although the name is different, there's a bit of a different constitution, it is the same formula, effectively. And it inherits from the legacy of the previous CIA-trained operations in Afghanistan. So, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm overthinking it, but the historical ties, the correlations, and in fact, the fact that the timing of it all, for me, is not inconsequential. There is certainly a cause for us to step back a bit and to have a look, and I don't know, perhaps I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm just a bit hesitant to just take it at face value because something doesn't seem right. Something doesn't seem right at all.
Okay, so to that, I'd say obviously we have to be cautious, and we know, like you said, they'd want the return on their investment as any corporation would, and that's what America is, right? One big fat bank for Yitzhak. But we can't dismiss the spiritual, religious, providence, God factor in these things. And if we just look at Afghanistan itself, since as you raised that, the Taliban originally was a creation of the ISI.
Yes.
And the proto-Al-Qaeda groups, well, it was Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but it became something else. They are not, there's no denying from their side, that they received training from the CIA via Pakistan, and all that Israel got weapons into Pakistan and then into Afghanistan, etc. But the Taliban today is not that Taliban that was the initial Taliban that was created.
No, of
by
course.
the ISI.
Sorry, Brother Abdul-Rahman. Of course not. I've heard this argument.
I'm not saying you're saying it is, but what I'm saying is that something can morph. I've used the term Frankenstein's monster, or in a different context. An example would be, maybe if we go back in history, an example would be perhaps, this phrase of kissing the Mongol spurs, whereas when you had the Golden Horde, named because of the amount of gold they would levy in revenue, golden slaves, frankly, from Eastern Europe over what is now Russia, Ukraine. And the tax collectors the Slavic Christian tax collectors, who would by then become Muslim Tatar Khans. They would kiss the spurs, the boots of the Muslim Khan who would come to take the taxes, a sign of their. They weren't doing it as like a jizya thing. They weren't, it was more like Mongol Turkic culture, and just that's what they do. They slaves and tax and whatever. And so as a sign of their submission, a very overt sign of their humiliation, they would kiss the spurs. And there's that a sudden break where there's a refusal of the client tax collector of the Russian Christians to kiss the spur, and that was a sign of we're no longer gonna submit to you. And then slowly but surely they started, not only did they not start paying taxes, they started going on the offensive, counter-revolution or counter-conquest, until they went into Kazan, they went into Crimea, Astrakhan. They broke up the Golden Horde into 3 separate spaces, each an empire in their own right. They were still very powerful, but now they were 3, based in Astrakhan, based in Kazan, and based in Crimea. And one by one they picked them off until the last of them, the Crimean one, the Ottomans came and kind of like adopted it rather than allow it to fall into Russian hands. And this happened throughout history. So we saw the same with the Taliban. They actually became the enemy in many ways of Pakistan, depending on which government was in Pakistan. Certainly not so the case with Imran Khan. He was being a Pashtun himself. Not just for those reasons. He had some integrity, it seemed, and he didn't want to be anyone's, poodle. And so he was refusing, as is well known, drone attacks, or to allow Pakistan to be used as a base. So that was the kind of potential warming period between the Taliban and its former creators, if you like, in the Pakistani intelligence. But then what happened, Imran Khan happened, and as was before the case, and they became far from on the same page. And there's no reason why the Muslims can't, just like you and I and everyone else can see this, and certainly it's not just thinking Muslims, but non-Muslims and from all the different spectrums, the left and the right, they're all seeing what we're seeing. But as are, to emphasize again, the Muslims, amongst those who are in the army, the Mujahideen, the resistance, who are now on paper, hesitant to say officially in charge of Syria, are very intelligent people, as well as idiots, as well as your cavemen, Neanderthal, troglodyte, Daeshites. They'll be there. But then there's also people who are really smart as well, and certain events, because it's easy to look at what we're doing and what everyone else would be doing at the macro level and the big things that are happening. But sometimes small details give some things away. So just and if I may volunteer, and this is without getting into the spiritual aspect in terms of where Assad, because we have to respond to what you mentioned there about the need to get rid of Assad as being part of a wider project, because there's some kind of counter narrative to that as well that played out. But just as a kind of tangential thing to consider, we've seen in these few days during and then the liberation of Syria up until Damascus fell or was taken, very blatant talking heads from the emigre or expatriate Central Asian Islamist community, trained by, supplied by, and receiving intel by and coordinated by Turkey. And they are so brazen. They will say, "These are your brothers from Uzbekistan," and they're Islamists. Whichever way however way you spin it, they are Islamists. And in a non-pejorative way, I will say they're jihadists because they're making jihad. And they are saying, they're not saying in Arabic, they're saying in their language.
Mana orqada turgan jamoatimiz mujohidlari. Alhamdulillah, Alloh subhanahu va taolodan bu fathu nusratni muborak qilishligini, Shom diyorida islom bayrog'i hilpirashini, shariatning hukmi oliy bo'lishligini, toat ahli aziz, kufr va shirk ahli xor va zalil bo'lishini Alloh taolodan so'rab qolamiz. Va mana orqamizda turgan.
It could be Uzbek or Uyghur, because bear in mind the Uzbek and the Uyghurs, they belong to the Qarliq subdivision of the Turkic supra ethno-linguistic language family, whereas the Turks of Turkey, of Azerbaijan and of Turkmenistan, they belong to the Oghuz Turks. Then you have the Kipchaks, Tatars and others. But anyway, these belong Uzbek, even though they're not connected by any land. They're separated by Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. The Uzbeks and the Uyghurs belong to the same, even though, as I said, there's no common land between them, no land bridge between them. So they're the same ethnic Turkic group, subgroup, the Qarliq Turks. So it could be either. Now, just imagine the optics of this. You've got these people who come from a region, whether they're Uyghurs or they're Uzbeks, where there's the police state essentially, where hijab is banned in various places, in various public places, where having a beard and being a certain age was in early days, I was going to say death warrant, that'd be an exaggeration. It would be a police warrant, maybe, a warrant to get your house searched and arrested. But certainly it would put you on the watch list if you had a beard. All of the Eastern Bloc was like that, former Soviet Union, but it still is like that in the land of the Uyghurs in China, Western China, Xinjiang, so-called East Turkestan, and it still is like that in Uzbekistan. And yet you have people trained by NATO, Turkey is a NATO country, boasting in formation, in groups, in their language, to their own people, which of course is is being observed by the Turkish and Uzbek authorities. We're making jihad, we've conquered Halab, and we're going on, inshallah, our march to jihad, we're going to conquer such and such, and Homs to Damascus. Allah Takbir, Allah Akbar.
Ya Damashq ahli, ya Damashq ahli, Buxorodan sizlarga nusrat qilish uchun keldik. Sizlarga Samarqanddan keldik. Buxoriylar diyoridan, Samarqandliklar diyoridan keldik. Biz sizlarga yordam berib, Baytul Maqdis va mana bunday bir muborak yerlarda Allohning kalimasi oliy bo'lishi uchun, takbirlar aytilishi uchun keldik. Allohim o'zing shohid bo'lgin. O'zingning yo'lingda sabit qadam turishlikni nasib qilgin. Barakallohu fikum, hayyakumulloh. Alloh taolo barchalardan rozi bo'lsin. Assalomu alaykum va rahmatullohi va barakatuh.
Takbir! Takbir! Takbir!
This, from the Turkish perspective, is extremely, the country, Turkey, Erdogan, is extremely brazen, and we've had this word a lot now, it's a betrayal and a treachery of Russia, and Russia in terms of the axis of resistance, what they did to Bashar, which we can get back into, but also China, and these countries. And so this suggests that Turkey itself, like it or not, is basically saying, in your face, sucker, in your face.
That's it.
I mean, that's what he's telling them, because they didn't have to use Islamists or jihadists. They could have had this literally tens of thousands of expatriate Uzbeks in Turkey, even if they're naturalized. They were born, even if they're nationalized now. I mean, they came from Uzbekistan, first generation. In fact, even before Syria kicked off, and I don't just mean this Syria, the first Syria, I was told by one guy who was involved at the time, you just tell me, it was just like the culture, how some people, they can, when they have a bit of freedom, they take liberties and they get themselves in the trouble. So you allow me to digress, but it does have relevance. He said that, so he mentioned the brothers, these were like, some of them were, they're all religious, let's say anyway, and they were from the North Caucasus. And so they had a little group, like just in the UK, if Muslims get together and they have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they kind of well-to-do of a certain age, they may invest in a peri-peri chicken outlet, or in a Hajj, an Umrah package company, or maybe nowadays in Bitcoin, or they might have an Islamic project. Let's have a Dawah center with a coffee shop, right? That's what kind of religious, God-fearing people who've got a bit of money and some smart people amongst them, some investors. They might do these kind of projects. In that clan, in that culture, it's like, let's start the Jama'ah. Let's start the Jama'ah and train ourselves and get some weapons so that, we'll be ready if ever anything kicks off. Then we'll have our little, almost like a PMC. So, of course, they started with small arms and everything, which is fine, because even criminals will have small arms. It doesn't raise so many red flags. But then they took it a bit further, and they started, by hook or crook, getting hold of RPGs and small mortars and everything. At that point, of course, the state has to get involved, and they've been watching all along. But then, so all of them got arrested, and they all got pulled up and said, "What do you think you're doing?" Oh, and they had to come clean, right? Because obviously everything was being monitored and tapped. I think, we just support my own little Jamaat. This is what we do back at home. We just wanted, a military outfit. And surprisingly, what the intelligence said to them, they go, "If you want to do that, that's fine. So as long as you do it with us, we'll give you the training.
Really?
We'll give you the weapons. Yeah, we'll give you the weapons. And then they'll be okay. But if you do it this way, then it's a criminal activity." So none of them actually got arrested. They just got sequestered. That's the right term. So, and this was even before Syria kicked off. And so now, jump to yesterday and the day before, these last few days, Uzbeks and Uyghurs in their own language shouting back for their home crowd, homeboys, "Look what we're doing! We're doing jihad." Allahu Akbar. So this suggests two things: either they didn't get the memo, which Jolani has been trying to put on them, that we're here for pluralism, we're going to establish a free society. What was happening in the past in terms of Daesh and AQ, that's behind us. We're going to put the Christmas tree back up and everything else. They didn't get the memo that, because of course everything has to be controlled, right? That China and Uzbekistan are not Islamist states. And if you come to our country, you should not be getting involved in jihadism, in Islamism, in marching to a third country, and doing your little, shooting and tooting. So either the Turks failed to manage and to control the PR of these battalions, who, according to some estimates, number in the thousands, or this was deliberate. They knew it and they allowed it to be said. So, and if it's the latter, this suggests that Turkey is trying to say, whatever organization we belong to, whether it's BRICS, whether it's NATO, we're strong enough right now to do what we think we need to do. And there's in our interest, we could have used secular Turks, and apparently they are there as well, the Grey Wolves, who are nasty, ultra-nationalist Kemalist Turks. We could use them, but we're just as capable of using beaded Wahhabis with guns screaming Allahu Akbar, which is clearly what they've done. And of course, there's a history of this kind of the Ottomans deploying, the Ottomans, maybe Freudian slip there, Neo-Ottomanists employing these things. And of course, just jumping like horizontally to Russia, they've seen this as a big treachery in terms of abandoning Assad, abandoning the axis of resistance. And Putin will want his pound of flesh, but he can't have that now because Turkey, and again, this is all speculating now, but this must have gone in calculus of Erdogan and his foreign ministry and so on, in that they control the Bosphorus Straits, Sea of Marmara that leads into the Black Sea. And should they allow NATO naval assets to pass through those straits into the Black Sea, then it's maybe not curtains for the Russian project in Ukraine, but most of the Ukraine contested territory is on the Black Sea. It's coastal territory, the littoral of the Black Sea, all of which incidentally was in an entirely Muslim area, which is why that fault line between the Ukraine side and the Russian side is where it is, because the Russians came in to replace the Muslims. That's why there's that dividing line between them. Anyway, so Turkey has that, if you like, that the lever to allow NATO in, and so that's why Russia can't, punish Turkey right now. Putin can't punish Erdogan for this betrayal. But should the Ukraine war come to a conclusion, which we don't know what Trump is going to do, but as of today, Russia is winning that war. But it could turn drastically in another direction. After that, Putin will demand his pound of flesh. So again, this is either reckless, extremely reckless behavior to basically give the finger to China, to Uzbekistan, and to Russia, or he's trying to say, Uzbekistan, I'm your guy, I'm the father of the Turks, because it's, of the super body, all the Turkic super nation of the Stans, if you like, with the exception of Tajikistan, which is a Persian country. And likewise, I don't care about, because as far as China is concerned, these are terrorists, Uyghurs, and apparently some say there's as many as 5,000 of them fighting. in Idlib and elsewhere. There's in the semester.
Brother Abdul-Rahman, I have to remind you, this call might be monitored. I'm not sure if we're being recorded somewhere.
My assumption is it is recorded. So it's a calculated risk. So two of them were Uyghurs. One was Hue, and I talk about this more. I've got a video called Hue of the Dragon. Nice term with the as Bruce Lee, Hue of the Dragon. Hue of the Uyghurs that ended up in Idlib, and then would get trained by Turkey or HTS and or even within Daesh earlier on, and then end up or from Afghanistan itself. And then end up fighting in today now in the battle to take Syria. Same with the Islamic student body in Egypt. You mentioned the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood coup. As soon as Morsi fell, all of the student body from the Stan, from Russia, and so on and so forth, from China, they went to, where did they go? They went to Syria, the next best place they could go to. They went there, and then as Syria was shrinking, whether they went with Daesh or whether they weren't that extreme and they just wanted to seek refuge from being persecuted and sent back home to be renditioned or disappear, as Syria was shrinking, as the jihadi assets were shrinking, so was their living space until they ended up in Idlib. Some of them went into Turkey itself, others stayed within Idlib, but now they've expanded back out. So that's like how these people ended up where they are. And Turkey's taken ownership of them and bragging that it has them as assets. And they're the ones who are wearing the NATO uniforms and seem to be no doubt, because there's that fraternal brotherhood connection. As the Turks have a saying that if you can come and drink our soup, meaning people of the stance, you're our brothers, our brethren in terms of ethnic affiliation. So come here and drink our soup with us. And so they're obviously the most closely allied to Turkey, more so than the Arabs, more so than European foreign fighters and anyone else. So when you put that into the mix as well, it's not just, and this is kind of to push back again, it's not just that the Zionists, what they say in the world, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but just as a counter narrative or look for another angle. It's not just they who call the shots. There is agency within other countries as well. And then just finally on this point with Assad, yes, everything you said is right. Obviously, the treacle sickness, come on, everything else. But bear in mind, there was a rapprochement between Assad and the Gulf states.
Yes, this summer. He's been on a tour this summer actually. His final tour.
MBS welcomed him and they tried to rehabilitate it. And this is where I want to bring in the religious aspect, in that everything that Bashar didn't have to go the way it did had he not allowed the extreme Shia militias to do what they did to the civilian population. Because all of the Muslim world, that would include the Shia, include Iran, that they're part of the Muslim body. They feel pain, even if there's separations in terms of creed. And I'm not saying there isn't kufr with some sects, whether they claim to be Sunni or Shia. I'm saying that as the laity, the lay people, let alone leave the people who are, the clerical class, but the lay people, they feel pain. They're normal, they want to get by and see their children do well and everything else. And they want to outlive their parents, and parents not want to have to bury their children, everything else, they're part of that. So people generally aren't given to butchery and mass rape. You have to poison it. You use that to co-opt the appropriate the word you use. You have to poison a person's morality for them to think it's okay to rape a young girl, to chop someone's head off, to murder them. You have to have that level of hatred, and that's of course some of these Fadaim that came from the Hazara. Coincidentally, the Mongol Shia contingent from Hazarajat, the province of Afghanistan, who are always an outlier in terms of their allegiances. Because we mentioned Pakistan and Israel and all the rest of America in terms of Afghanistan, but of course, you also had the Iranians were also fighting as Mujahideen. They had proxies, and those were the Hazara, which means Persian. Hazara means 1,000. And the name comes from a tumen, it's called in the Altaic languages, Turkic and Mongol. It means 1,000-man troop or battalion or division, I should say. So the Mongols left 1,000 men behind, actual Mongols, and then they became Muslim and they became Shia, or they became Shia straight away, I should say. And that's where the Hazara come from. And because the Mongol gene like the African gene, or I should say sub-Saharan African gene, is a dominant gene. When they will breed with Indo-Europeans, then the children will take on more of the Mongol, as it will be African gene, then they're more recessive Europoid or Caucasoid, and Australoid, not Australoid, what's the other one? Mongoloid. No, actually, we're talking about Mongols. Anyway, let's say Indo-European genes or fairer genes. And so that was seen as a tactic that, and this was actually from the Mongols, is that we will rape the Pakhtuns and the Tajiks, and we will, turn them into, this was a tactic of war that they did during the first Afghan jihad, when they were fighting against the Sunni, when they fell into fighting the Sunni things. So Bashar could have, used this moral outrage of what shared between Shia and Sunnis as to what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, even though they have different understandings of the value of Al-Aqsa and so on and so forth. But he allowed these militias, be it Hezbollah, who again, even with Hezbollah, they were considered heroes at one point, as you recall, from 1982. I forgot the name of that war, the 982 war. The 982 war, when Israel went into Lebanon, and they took a beating. Hezbollah gave them a serious beating. And you had these phrases that came out of the Sunni community: "We are all Hezbollah now," because at that point in time, Hezbollah didn't have their guns targeted at Sunnis. It was only at the Zionists, and they gave them a serious beating. And that was the first time that they could, they took out so many tanks, for example, because the Israelis, in their arrogance, had this air of invincibility about them, and the Hezbollah shattered it. So they had that capital goodwill amongst the wider region. But then Bashar allowed them to turn their guns on the civilians. Had it been against AQ or the Daesh only, because Daesh killed as many Sunnis as anyone else anyway, and they weren't popular at all. But he allowed them to do what they did. Hence, we see the prison breaks of all these women and children, people who've been in there for 40 years and whatnot, 4 decades. He didn't need to do that. He could have allowed the Sunnis to form militias, just as Hezbollah was. So this shows that it didn't have to go the way it did. The Gulf states were willing to rehabilitate him, and then they had the backing of the wider powers. And I've just finished.
Sorry, brother Abdul-Rahman. That's amazing. It's an amazing line of thinking. I'm not trying to exonerate Bashar. I want to make it very clear. I hate Bashar. In fact, as I said, when we were doing the countdown following the the Great Arab Spring, I was a lot younger then and a lot more hopeful, and I subscribe to the same sentiment that many of my peers subscribe to. We've had enough. Okay, 40 years, 50 years in many of these countries, we've had enough of the dictatorship. I had a book back then that I still have, 5 minutes. 5 minutes, please. It's like a book that was written. It was the Syrian version of Zainab al-Ghazali's The Return of the Pharaohs. Pharaoh. This was from a Syrian detainee, a sister. I had read that book as well. Yeah, so that was it. This is a translation which is a lot milder than the original, but nevertheless, I'm not oblivious to the horrors of Assad and his father, and what happened in Hama, 40,000 people. So I know exactly, the devilish kind of history he has. Is no exoneration for him. But I think, and you're right, I mean, there are various fingers in the pie. But what we oftentimes what we do overlook when we focus on Assad is the people behind him. The generals behind him, the corrupt generals. In fact, I would say Assad, to play on his name, Assad means a lion, right? For those who don't speak, he was not a lion. He was actually the prey. He was the prey. The lions were around him. And even if he had wanted to perhaps turn directions, I don't think they'll permit him to do what he wanted to do necessarily. I mean, he's calling the shots, figuratively speaking, but I don't think we can just put it all on Assad, because the danger of that is Assad has left, he's gone to Moscow. But the real lions are still there.
They say he's become optometrist in Abkhazia, more places like that, maybe in Dubai, and there's even some analysis of his lack of jawline, and saying that this fits in with the submissive character. I don't know, reverse cephalic index. And no, I get that, But which is why I didn't actually get into Iran itself or even the religious aspect and how like even with Afghanistan, when you had that vulture situation or hyenas and everyone coming for the kill, the scholars, the Sunni scholars, were very, very aware of this. I heard direct from Sheikh, and he said, when the Mujahideen were about to take Kabul, so you could say it's similar to what's happening now with Damascus. Of all people, or from the people they called, was Sheikh Al-Albani, Muhammad Nasir Albani, for those, because of course but he was known to be more willing to talk. Actually, I have to be careful. I'm not saying the others weren't as willing, but let's say he was independent. He was in Jordan. He wasn't under state patronage. If anything, he was under house arrest, right? So he wasn't, trying to placate his society. He'd just say, and he had a lot of face time with leaders of Islamist revolutionary movements. Abdul-Rahman claimed to be a student for some time. Muhammad al-Maqdisi sat with him a few times. The Ali bin Had from Algeria, they had some face time.
Abdul-Rahman al-Otaibi used to invite him, when they still had the Ikhwan, So he was very well connected, very well respected as well amongst the...
and he would challenge, like, even the leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Taqiyuddin Bahani. He said, come, let's talk, because he had that thing about him. And 3 times he said, let's talk, as in debate, and 3 times, and Bahani, for whatever reason, found a reason not to sit down with him in the end. So when he got the call and they said, look, we're about to take Kabul and we want to give you this good news. And he said, how many banners are you? How many organizations? And I forgot the number, so I'll just throw out a number. Let's say 7. I think it's actually 12. So I'll say 12, but obviously don't quote me on that. So there's 12 factions, 12 divisions, with this Hekmatyar, Dostom, and actually, no, they meant actually the more Islamic ones, so it would have been, more Salafist inclined. Proto-Al-Qaeda and all the rest of them. And Abdul-Azam's one as well. And he said, 12 banners means 12 hearts. I fear the fighting that is about to engulf you is going to be worse than the fighting that you suffered from the hands of the Russians. And that's exactly what happened. Because as was said, as some of the, one of these, I don't want to say urban legend, but something that was passed around at the time, following this time, is that the women of Kabul would say, at least we wouldn't get bombed in our homes while the Russians were doing what they were doing. They were taking villages and storming it. But in the capital, in our homes, we'd be relatively safe. As soon as the Mujahideen started fighting each other, if one guy had it, Hekmatyar would bomb the part of the downtown Kabul that he had, and then his rival, I forgot the guy's name now,
Hekmatyar. The butcher
Hekmatyar's main rival, I forgot his name now.
Sayyaf?
No, I forgot his name. Maybe it'll come to me. So the ulama saw this, and no doubt these things are well known even amongst the jihadi class as well, whether they agree with them or not. So that's why I'm more optimistic, because like I said, just as we're aware that people are trying to manipulate things and everything you mentioned, these people are also aware amongst them. I said they're idiots, but then also very intelligent people, and trained to be intelligent. They're like every facet of society. When you've got populations, in numbering in the hundreds of thousands in terms of what they were governing, and they will, and it was it wasn't a it was a meritocracy. In fact, some of the Idlib enclave. In some respects, in that you would rise by rank, not by tribal affiliation. I meant in terms of the structure. Same with Qasim Soleimani, has to be said. He got to where he got, not because he was connected to anyone. It's because his performance on the battlefield on behalf of Iran. So amongst these people will both. Let's just say amongst the people will be smart people as well, So I'm hopeful that they will see what's happened in history. They'll be aware, but more so they'll understand that, whatever situation you find yourself in as a Muslim, you have a guide that, which is the Book and the Sunnah, that's telling you how to navigate within these situations. And you saw Salahuddin Ayyubi do the exact same thing as he was under as he was essentially a client, sent off on his sabbatical by Nuruddin Zengi to the Fatimid Caliph, the dying the twilight years of the Fatimid Caliph, and when he saw his opportunity, he kind of, usurped the power. He kind of fell into his lap almost. And this happened again with the Mongols. The Muslims, saw the opportunity and they took it. Throughout history, or even of course our main guide, our role model is the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and how they bore with patience until Medina came, and then Medina came, and after the Hijrah was Badr. The difference between us and the jihadi, and now I do mean in a pejorative sense, those who innovate in the concept of jihad, is that they will have Badr before Medina, in that they will fight first and truth out your state. Whereas the Sunnah with Allah is that Allah will give you earn the state, then you earn the right to fight. Because you have a state that will protect the women and children. You don't put yourself into a situation where you can't defend everyone else. It's easy for a man to say, "Well, I'll die shaheed." Yeah, but what about the women and children? So Badr comes first. That's not just the reason, but generally, Hijrah comes first, Medina, and then Badr, and that's what's happened. That's where we are now. We're at Medina. Damascus has fallen. Now it's up to them, aware of all the machinations. In fact, in some ways, and we hope no civilians have died. In some ways, we hope that it's a good thing that Netanyahu has been so brazen as to steal land, because had he not done that, and had he made some kind of overtures of now we're going to help the democratic process, and we're going to invest, and let's have a peace treaty, let's have normalization. Instead of that, what did he do? Went and stole their land and bombed the crap out of.
So that's a timely reminder that bridge has been burnt. So there's no. Yeah.
But what this tells the Sunnis though is that the jihad isn't over, because now there's no way you can claim to be an Islamist jihad fighting outfit while forget Golan after you took Damascus under your watch, while you were the Emir and the Sultan and the Wali al-Amr. They took the land of the Ard of Islam from you.
The recording has stopped.